Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I needed a very impromptu video topic because I had originally planned to upload another video, but reasons made it so that you'll only get that video next week. If you want to know why, go look at my Twitter, links down below. But anyway, because of that, I decided that today I wanted to talk about something that I've been meaning to talk about for a while now on my channel, and that is to talk about my favorite world building in fantasy, more specifically mostly high fantasy. Of course, if you've seen even just one of my videos, you will know that a lot of what I read is fantasy. Like, most of what I read is fantasy. Probably around 80 to 90% is some type of fantasy, mostly high fantasy. And for me personally, not just when it comes to high fantasy, but fantasy in general, world building is a very, very integral part of what makes fantasy fantasy. That does not mean that you have to have the most intricate world building ever and everything needs to be thought through. But in any fantasy book, you will usually find some elements that, you know, are made up, that are world building, that aren't just taken one-to-one from our world and put into the book. And so because of that, I thought I'd take today's video, I'd tell you what I look for in my fantasy world building, and I'll share with you a few books that just have world building that I very much enjoy personally. So in the past year and a half, I have discovered personally that when it comes to a lot of world building and fantasy, what I enjoy most is less the typical world building. So it's less the like environmental, magical world building, less the physical world building. And what I enjoy more is the social, cultural world building. Something I especially enjoy is, of course, if I can see that an author has put a lot of thought into queerness in their world. So, you know, I can take or leave the physical aspects. Honestly, I don't read descriptions that closely anyway, be they of people, single people, or be they of the environment. And with magical world building, as long as you stay somewhat consistent, I don't need a hard magic system. I can do with the softest magic system, the most whimsical magic system ever. Just, as I said, stay somewhat consistent and I'll be happy as can be. So these books, most of these books that I'm going to talk about, a lot of times are books that do the cultural, social aspect of world building very well, that for me also include a lot of things in world building that I feel a lot of authors forget about, and that use their world building in a way that it really helps tell the story and that it helps make us understand the motivation behind the characters. And so yeah, let's just jump right into these books so you'll get a feel for what I enjoy in my world building. Also, these are in no particular order. So maybe let's start with this book over here, which is the one non-fantasy book I have on my list, because science fiction, of course, also has a lot of world building. And the series I'm talking about is the Texelan duology by Arkady Martin. I only have the second book right here because I lent the first book to a friend. The first book is A Memory Called Empire. This is A Desolation Called Peace. And the reason why I love this world building so much is because, in my opinion, this is less of a world building where it's like, okay, the people believe this, and this is how the politics work, and this is how the system works, and this is how the physics works, or whatever. And actually, I have had discussions with Max from Max Reads, like slight discussions, where he said he doesn't feel like this book gives him enough world building, and I'm like, respectfully, but I very much disagree, because it gives me everything in world building that I want. And that is that this world building is mostly based on colonial structures and colonial dynamics. And so you don't get to see those structures in action directly that much, because you mostly follow one single character. However, we do get the world building through our main character and through how our main character is impacted by how the world and the system works. And that's just the type of world building that I enjoy so much, because for that world building you don't need a lot of exposition. Not that I mind exposition dumps or anything. Again, I read fantasy. Pretty much whenever I start a book, I assume there's gonna be exposition dumps. But it's just, it's just so well done, and I cannot really properly explain what the world building is, because again, the world building in this book is less the expositional type. There's some political world building, there's some world building in terms of philosophy, in terms of concepts that people believe in, which by the way is also something that I very, very much enjoy when you kind of go into the thematic world building. But there's not world building in the way where it's like, these are the weapons used, these are the animals that are living there, these are the people that live there. It's just, it's very ungraspable, if that is a word. It's not a word, but you hopefully get what I mean. Then the next one I have is a series that is not like proper high fantasy, not like solid epic high fantasy, but it's just kind of episodical steampunk type fantasy, maybe a bit of futuristic fantasy. It's complicated. Anyway, it's the Invisible Library series by Genevieve Cogman. And the basic world building for this is that you have a bunch of alternate universes of our world that all live in different timelines and alternate timelines and so on. Some are in the future, some are in the past. You know, you get the gist. And then aside from these alternate universes, you also have the Invisible Library, which is this kind of place but also institution that collects stories from all the different universes. Now that's not the part of the world building that I love so much. The part of the world building that I love a lot is that all the different universes are somewhere on a scale between order and chaos. And you have creatures that are aligned with order, which are the dragons. Those rule the orderly places, or the places that have high order. And on the other side, you have the Fae, who rule the places with high chaos. And that's what I love, to be honest. Because the Fae are aligned with chaos, they are also very much aligned with storytelling. And you have this concept where each Fae chooses an archetype as part of his persona, as part of his life. And then they basically follow that archetype wherever it may lead them. And the more powerful a Fae is, the more they can influence the world around them to fit their archetype. It's just such an interesting concept and so fun, and it just helps the author perfectly play with tropes, but play with tropes in a way where she doesn't need to subvert them to comment on them, but where she can really lean into them and use them to tell the story. And I really, really love that. That's just, that's good world building, you know? Good world building is when the world building helps you tell the story. Then next I have The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. I'll probably talk about this quite quickly because there's not that much to talk about in terms of world building here, in my opinion at least, because this is a standalone novel. However, this is set like the entire world almost has a more futuristic feel. However, the specific setting of this book is set in a place that is mostly inspired by feudal Japan. And so first of all, you have that very interesting dichotomy between like modern world building and very traditional world building, which I just very much enjoyed. And then you also have very traditional family structures within the world, where the men are the fighters, the leaders, and so on, and the women are the ones who are the caretakers, they are the mothers, they are the one to you know, take care of the house and so on. And the thing that I love about that world building is that it is done in a way where, you know, usually this type of world building leaves it very open to just full on criticize these types of structures, which is in here. Like, this book is very critical of these traditional roles. Or well, maybe it's not correct to say that it's critical of the roles themselves, but it's critical of how strictly they are enforced. So you do have that. But at the same time, this book manages to toe the line where it criticizes the roles and it criticizes the enforcement of these roles without criticizing the people who maybe still want to live more quote-unquote traditional lives, and without, well, in a way it does put the fault, of course, with the people where the power is, but not as individuals. It's kind of hard to explain, to be honest. It just deals with these discussions in a very, very thoughtful and sensitive manner that I really enjoyed, when usually these types of discussions are just, you know, very in your face and very, this is bad and this is good. And so yeah, I enjoyed that. So that's book number 3 on my list. I mean, not book number 3, the third book I'm talking about, or I was talking about. Next, let's go with the one book on my list that actually has quote-unquote physical world building that I really enjoy, and that is the Ephemera series by Anne Bishop. In terms of physical and environmental and magical world building, this series probably has my favorite world building ever. And the reason for that is I've recently talked about it in my TBR, because I am gonna reread this series in October, or try to. But this series is set in a world where the world very much responds to your thoughts, feelings, wishes. And so you have these different parts of the world that are called landscapes, and you have women who have more of a closer bond with those landscapes and who can make sure that the single individuals living in those landscapes don't change the world too much, and that, you know, the dissonance between the people living in a world doesn't tear the world apart, if you want to put it like that. And then you have men who can build bridges between the different landscapes. And a lot of times bridges lead from one landscape to another, like they are anchored in specific landscapes. But at the same time, if you travel on a bridge and if your wishes or if your feelings are strong enough, that bridge may not lead you to the landscape that you want to get to, but it may lead you to a landscape that from its feeling fits who you felt like at the moment a bit better. So for example, if you feel very angry, it might be that you end up in a very dark landscape. And I don't know, I just find that concept so interesting and so fascinating, and the way it's handled within the series is also just so well done. And once again, it's the type of physical, magical world building that just really lends itself to driving the plot forward and to telling the story, to help to tell the story. So I really love it. Then next I have the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu, and this is probably currently my favorite political fantasy that I have ever read. And the political world building, cultural, social world building in this is just stellar. In a way, it's very traditional, because, you know, you have your just usual elements. You have your politics, you have your, well, not actually magic, because there's not that much magic in there. I don't think there is any magic in here. There's just like magical creatures, non-magical creatures, fantastical creatures in here. You have some steampunk elements, which are just a lot of fun, because you don't get to see that a lot in, you know, traditional adult high fantasy. And then you also have the characters that, once again, are just very driven by how this world works and how the politics within the world work. You also have meddling gods a little bit in this series, so that's also an aspect to world building that I always think is a lot of fun. And once again, this is just the type of world building that I can't explain too much about, but there's just so much detail in here. And as I said, I'm not someone who always needs a lot of detail, but with this series and with the cultural detail that is put in this series, and in terms of philosophy and in terms of concepts and in terms of characters and who the characters are and how they have to act because of who they are within society, it's just so good. Just so good. I love it so much. Next, I'm just gonna say an author. I'm not even gonna say a specific book, but anything by N.K. Jemisin. N.K. Jemisin is a world builder unlike many others. So yeah, it's just so good. I think, I'm not sure if the Inheritance trilogy is my favorite, which again, we have a lot of meddling gods, we have gods walking among mortals and so on, so that's just parts of world building. That's the parts of magical world building that I really, really love, because then you get, you know, the influence of the magic on the society a lot, which that is, again, when I really love magical world building. Don't just give me how the magic works. Give me how the magic works, and because of how it works, how does society work? And that is definitely the case here. But then I also really love the Dreamblood duology by N.K. Jemisin and the world building in that, because in that one we have a matrilineal society, which, oh my god. By the way, most societies are patrilineal, which basically means that inheritance goes through the father's line, or a lot of societies are. I don't know if it's actually most. And matrilineal societies is when inheritance goes through the mother's line. But the society in the Dreamblood duology is both matrilineal as well as patriarchal, which means the head of the family is the uncle and not the father, basically. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's just, she's so good at world building. She's just so good at world building. And then I have 3 last books. All 3 of them belong into the category of my favorite queer world building. First, I have The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. In this one, I don't just love the queer world building, which this is a truly queer normative world, which means this society is structured in a way that queer couples don't get a disadvantage from being a queer couple, because I will just repeat that again, which I repeat every time I talk about queer normative world building, but a lot of times you have societies where it is seemingly normal to be a queer couple or to be queer, to be in a homosexual relationship. However, then society is still built in a way where inheritance works via bloodlines and where family works via bloodlines, which of course puts queer couples at a disadvantage, because unless you add magic, it is very unlikely that a queer couple is gonna have a child that is, you know, blood related to both parents. Now, in this one, we have a society where family does not work via bloodlines, but family registers, and I really, really love that. And then, once again, this is one of those world buildings where there's just so much detail paid to small social things. So, for example, there's so much detail when it comes to how the characters dress. And not in a way where it's just, like, described in a very detailed way, so you can, I don't know, build a scene or whatever, but where it makes sense that the characters wear what they wear, and when you put some thought into it, you know why they wear what they wear and what the significance is of specific clothes and so on. So yeah, it's just that type of world building that is at once very vibrant but also very detailed, and it makes me so happy. It makes me so incredibly happy. Then the second queer world building I have is the God King Chronicles, with the first book, The Black Coast by Mike Brooks. And once again, just the details, so beautifully done. Within the series we meet multiple different cultures, and every single culture has different stances towards queerness and gender. And in all the cultures you have aspects where it's like, okay, you're more traditional here, or quote-unquote traditional from a Western point of view, and you have aspects where you're more progressive from a Western point of view. For example, you have this one culture where you have women and men who are exactly equal, like there's no difference between women and men in standing. However, they are severely homophobic. Then you have another culture where men hold way more power than women, and women are basically powerless. However, they treat homosexuality as if it's completely normal, but at the same time they are also a very binary culture, and so they only know the gender binary, which makes them a bit stuck up towards third culture that we meet, who have, like, I don't know, 6 different genders, 7 different genders, I don't remember exactly. There's a lot of pronouns basically, and a lot of genders, and the way it's dealt with within the series is also so nice, because you then have characters who throughout the series change their pronouns and change their names, and from that point onwards their dead name, as far as I remember, isn't mentioned anymore. The old pronouns aren't used anymore, pretty much, and it's so well done, and I love it so much. And I love how, you know, yes, you do have, again, progressive and non-progressive aspects to most of the cultures, but the cultures aren't really villainized as a whole, but you only have this one aspect that the cultures are then actively challenged on. And when different people from the different cultures meet, they constantly challenge each other and help each other grow. And again, just world building that helps the plot. I love it. I love it so much. And then the last series I have, which currently is my magnum opus in terms of queer world building, is A Chorus of Dragons by Dandelion. This... Okay, let me start again. This series combines magical world building with queer world building, which is beautiful because you then have, for example, people who are transgender who sometimes decide to use magic to change their sex as well, to match their sex to their gender. And you have some people who do not mind. And then you have cultures that have gender concepts that you can't really properly translate into our world, which I love so much because that's how it works between cultures. There were anthropologists who said you can only talk about the gender conception of a specific culture in their own language because it's basically impossible to translate that shit. And it's impossible to translate the concepts without losing something along the way. And I feel like that's the case with one of the cultures in this world building. Then you have some races where gender matters not at all because they can just randomly build themselves a new biological body, which then also means they don't care about incest because that part is just gone. So yeah, there's just so much in the world building in this where the magic influences the culture and where there's so many different looks on how queerness can work in combination with the magic, but also without the magic, that I just... so good. I can highly recommend it. Also, I'm going to be organizing a read-along of this next year from January on, starting with The Ruin of Kings. So if what I talked about right now interests you, then definitely join us. My announcement video of the read-along will probably be up soon. But yeah, that was it for this video. Tell me in the comments down below what is your favorite part of world building, and also what is your favorite world building in a book that you've ever read about. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. All the links to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or gender queer person per month, will also be left linked down below, so go and check those out as well. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!